The Forgotten Village, Part 1. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dense forest as we made our way along the narrow winding trail. It was supposed to be a simple weekend hike with friends, a chance to disconnect from our hectic lives and reconnect with nature. The air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. We had been walking for hours, following a map that promised a breathtaking view from the top of a nearby hill. As we trudged along, the trail began to disappear, replaced by a series of faint, overgrown paths. Undeterred, we pressed on, confident in our sense of direction and the promise of adventure. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon something unexpected. There, in a small clearing, stood a village that wasn't marked on any map. The houses were old, their wooden structures weathered and worn by time. Ivy climbed the walls and broken windows stared out like empty eyes. It was clear that no one had lived here for many years.
Wow, this is incredible. It's like something out of a history book.
It's creepy. Why isn't this place on any map?
Maybe it's just been forgotten, I suggested, feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. Let's take a look around. We cautiously approached the nearest house, its door hanging loosely on rusted hinges. The interior was a mess of broken furniture and debris, but what caught my eye was the sheer silence of the place. It was as if the world outside had been muted, leaving only our breath and footsteps to break the stillness. We moved from house to house, each one telling the same story of abandonment and decay. There were no signs of recent habitation, no clues as to why the village had been left to rot. It was as if the people had vanished into thin air. As we explored further, we came across a small church at the center of the village. Its steeple rose high above the other buildings, and a large bell hung precariously in the tower. The door was slightly ajar, and with a glance we silently agreed to investigate. Inside, the church was eerily intact. Pews lined the aisle, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. At the front, a large, intricately carved altar stood as a testament to a time long past. It was then that we heard it, the faint sound of voices.
Did you hear that?
Sarah whispered, her face pale.
Yeah.
Ethan replied, his voice barely audible.
But where's it coming from?
We followed the sound, our footsteps echoing off the stone floor. The voices grew louder, but they were strange, disjointed, as if coming from another time. They spoke in a language we didn't understand, and there was an undercurrent of sadness in their tone. We reached a side room, its door slightly open. Peering inside, we saw a group of figures dressed in old-fashioned clothing. They moved about the room, seemingly unaware of our presence. Their faces were pale and translucent, and their eyes stared blankly ahead. It was like watching a scene from a play, but one that we had no part in.
Are they ghosts?
Ethan asked, his voice trembling.
I don't know.
I replied, unable to tear my eyes away from the spectral figures.
But I think we're witnessing something that happened here a long time ago.
The Forgotten Village, Part 2. The ghostly figures continued their silent play, oblivious to our presence. It was as if they were trapped in a loop, endlessly reliving the same moments. We watched, hearts pounding, as the scene unfolded before us. A young woman with a look of despair on her face cradled a crying child, while a man, presumably her husband, argued with another villager. Their gestures were frantic, their expressions filled with a mixture of fear and anger.
Look at that,
Sarah whispered, pointing towards a figure standing in the corner, away from the others. It was an elderly woman, her eyes wide with terror. She seemed to be shouting something, but no sound came from her lips. It was as if she was warning them, but of what, we couldn't tell. As we observed, the air around us grew colder. A thick mist began to seep through the cracks in the walls, swirling around our feet. The temperature drop was sudden and unnatural, sending shivers down our spines.
I don't like this.
Ethan muttered, his breath visible in the frigid air.
We should leave.
But I was captivated, unable to tear myself away.
Just a little longer.
I urged.
We need to understand what's happening.
A shadowy figure emerged from the trees, its form indistinct and shrouded in darkness. The villagers backed away, their faces contorted in terror. The young woman held her child close, tears streaming down her face. We watched in horrified fascination as the shadowy figure advanced, its presence overwhelming.
The villagers' silent screams filled the air, their terror resonating within us. It was clear that this was the source of their tragedy, the event that had condemned them to relive this nightmare for eternity.
As the shadowy figure reached the center of the village, the scene dissolved into mist once more. We were left standing in the silent, empty church, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The coldness lingered, a reminder of the horror we had just witnessed.
We need to get out of here. This place is cursed.
But I couldn't leave. Not yet. There's more to this story. We have to find out what happened.
Reluctantly, my friends agreed. We left the church and began to explore the village in search of answers, knowing that we were delving into a mystery far darker than we could have ever imagined. The Forgotten Village, Part 3. We stepped back into the misty village, the eerie silence weighing heavily on us. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel paths as we made our way towards what appeared to be the village square. It was a wide, open area with a crumbling fountain in the center. The fountain, once a centerpiece of life and activity, was now overrun with weeds and moss, its water long dried up. We spread out, each of us drawn to different parts of the square, searching for clues. Sarah examined the remnants of a marketplace, while Ethan moved towards a building that looked like an old tavern. I found myself standing before a large stone monument, its surface covered in inscriptions that had weathered the passage of time. As I brushed away the dirt and moss, I could make out some of the words carved into the stone. It was a memorial of sorts, dedicated to the villagers who had lived here. The names were accompanied by dates, all from over a century ago. My heart sank as I realized these were the people we had seen in the church.
Guys, come look at this!
I called out, my voice echoing in the empty square. Ethan and Sarah hurried over, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I pointed to the monument, highlighting the names and dates.
These must be the villagers, but what happened to them?
I don't know, but maybe we can find more clues inside that tavern.
The three of us made our way to the tavern, its entrance partially blocked by fallen beams and debris. We pushed our way inside, the interior dimly lit by the waning sunlight that filtered through the broken windows. Dust particles floated in the air, disturbed by our presence. The tavern was a mess of overturned tables and shattered glass. Old faded photographs hung crookedly on the walls, depicting happier times when the village was alive with activity.
Look, there's a dusty journal on the bar counter.
She carefully opened it and we gathered around to read the fragile pages. The journal belonged to the village's innkeeper, a man named Thomas. His entries started off mundane, detailing daily activities and interactions with the villagers. But as we read further, a darker story began to unfold. The entries spoke of strange occurrences, of a shadowy figure seen lurking in the forest. The villagers had grown increasingly fearful, convinced that something malevolent was watching them.
This entry, dated a week before the village was abandoned, sent chills down my spine. The figure grows bolder each night. Last evening it stood at the edge of the village, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The children are frightened, and the adults are on edge. We must do something before it's too late.
We looked at each other, the weight of the journal's words sinking in. The shadowy figure we had seen in the church was no mere ghost. It was something far more sinister.
We need to find out what happened on that last night. Maybe there's something in the village records.
Our next stop was the village hall, a large building that had once served as the center of administration and community events. The doors creaked loudly as we pushed them open, revealing a long hallway lined with rooms. We split up, each of us searching for any documents or records that might shed light on the village's fate. In a small office at the end of the hall, I found a stack of papers covered in dust. They were old records, detailing the village's history and notable events. As I sifted through them, I found a letter addressed to the village council, dated the day before the village was abandoned. To the esteemed members of the council, it read, "I write to you in desperation. The figure in the forest is not of this world. It brings with it a curse, a darkness that seeps into our very souls. We must leave this place, abandon our homes and seek safety elsewhere. If we stay, we are doomed to suffer its wrath for eternity. The letter was signed by Thomas, the innkeeper. It was clear that the villagers had been facing an unimaginable horror, one that had ultimately driven them to flee. But it seemed they hadn't escaped after all, forever trapped in a ghostly limbo, reliving their final moments. I shared my findings with Ethan and Sarah, their faces reflecting the same mix of fear and determination I felt. We needed to uncover the full story, to understand the curse that had befallen this forgotten village. And so, with the sun setting and the shadows lengthening, we steeled ourselves for the final part of our investigation, knowing that the answers we sought were likely to be as terrifying as the ghostly apparitions we had witnessed. The Forgotten Village, Part 4. The air grew colder as the last light of day faded into the encroaching night. The oppressive silence of the village was now broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Determined to uncover the full story, we made our way back to the church, the place where we had first encountered the ghostly figures. As we entered the church once more, the air inside felt thicker, almost suffocating. We approached the altar, where an ancient leather-bound book lay, previously unnoticed. The cover was embossed with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light.
Sarah gently opened the book, and we gathered around to read. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, detailing rituals and protective spells. It appeared to be a grimoire, a book of magic and lore passed down through generations of the village's spiritual leaders. One entry in particular caught our attention. The shadow dweller of the woods, a creature of darkness and despair, feeds on the fear and sorrow of the living. It has cursed our village, trapping us in a never-ending cycle of torment. Only by performing the ancient ritual of light can we hope to banish it and free our souls.
The ritual required several components: a candle made of beeswax, a mirror to reflect the light, and an incantation to be spoken at the stroke of midnight. Realizing the gravity of our discovery, we knew what we had to do. Ethan found an old beeswax candle in one of the nearby houses, while Sarah retrieved a small, ornate mirror from the tavern. The final piece of our plan was the incantation, which we memorized carefully. We returned to the church, ready to perform the ritual. The minutes ticked by slowly as we prepared, each of us feeling the weight of the task ahead. Finally, midnight arrived. We lit the candle, and its flickering flame cast eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah held the mirror, positioning it to catch and reflect the light throughout the room. Taking a deep breath, I began to recite the incantation. By the light of this flame, we call upon the spirits of the past. By the power of reflection, we banish the darkness. Shadows be gone, return to the void. Let the light of truth and purity cleanse this place. As I spoke, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candle's flame wavered. The shadows around us seemed to writhe and pulse as if resisting our efforts. But we continued, our voices growing louder and more confident with each word. The ghostly figures reappeared, their expressions shifting from despair to hope. The shadowy figure at the edge of the village began to wail, its form dissolving into a swirling mass of darkness. The candle's flame flared brightly and the mirror reflected a brilliant light that filled the room. With a final agonized shriek, the shadowy figure vanished, and the coldness that had gripped the village lifted. The ghostly villagers, now free from their eternal torment, began to fade away, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. The village, once shrouded in darkness and despair, seemed to breathe again. The oppressive atmosphere lifted and a sense of peace settled over the abandoned buildings.
We did it,
Ethan said, his voice filled with awe.
We freed them.
Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. As we left the village, the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. We walked in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The map we carried had led us to a place not marked by any cartographer, but it had also guided us to a deeper understanding of courage, compassion, and the enduring power of light over darkness. The village may have been forgotten, but its story would live on in our hearts, a reminder of the mysteries and wonders that lie hidden in the world, waiting to be discovered.